Jake Murphy had 3 rules for surviving as a maintenance tech on mining station Omega-7. Rule 1. Never volunteer for anything. Rule 2. Coffee fixes everything, except broken coffee machines. Rule 3. When in doubt, hit it with a wrench until it works or breaks completely, because at least then you know where you stand. Unfortunately, Jake was about to break all 3 rules in spectacular fashion. The trouble started, as it often did, with the coffee machine in Section C. The ancient piece of junk had been making sounds like a dying space whale for weeks, and today it finally gave up the ghost entirely. Jake stood there, wrench in hand, swearing at the machine with the kind of creative language that would make a cargo hauler blush. "You worthless piece of recycled scrap metal," Jake muttered, giving it one final therapeutic whack. "I've seen toasters with more dignity." That's when the coffee machine shuddered, sparked, and miraculously started brewing again. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake said, taking a sip of the surprisingly decent coffee. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." What Jake didn't notice was the 8-foot-tall, 4-armed alien warrior standing in the doorway, watching this entire performance with what could generously be called interest. Kravex of the Vorthak Empire had seen many things in his centuries as a hunter. He had stalked the crystal serpents of Nexus Prime, battled the void krakens of the Outer Rim, and once spent 3 months tracking a single target across 7 star systems. But he had never seen a creature defeat a mechanical opponent through what appeared to be ritualized violence and verbal abuse. The human was small, perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with graying hair and the kind of slouched posture that suggested he'd given up on impressing anyone years ago. His coveralls were stained with enough different substances to qualify as a hazmat situation, and he moved with the weary efficiency of someone who'd spent decades fixing things that other people had broken. In Kravex's culture, this human would be considered prey, weak, unworthy of notice. But that coffee machine had been broken for weeks. Kravex had heard the other humans complaining about it constantly, and this Jake Murphy had fixed it with nothing but brute force and what the humans called percussive maintenance. "Fascinating. Human," Kravex announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made seasoned warriors straighten their spines. "I am Kravex, blade sanger of the Vortek, hunter of the Crimson Moons. I have observed your victory over the mechanical beast." Jake turned around, coffee mug halfway to his lips, and nearly dropped it. Standing behind him was what appeared to be the unholy offspring of a praying mantis and a bodybuilder, complete with ceremonial armor that probably cost more than Jake's annual salary. "Print," Jake said, which was about as eloquent as he got before his first cup of coffee. "Hi there, big guy. You're really tall." "I challenge you to combat," Kravex continued, apparently immune to small talk. "The ancient right of the hunt. You have proven yourself worthy by defeating the machine spirit in single combat." Jake blinked. "The machine spirit? You mean the coffee maker? I just hit it with a wrench." "Yes," Kravex said solemnly. "Ancient warrior techniques, passed down through generations. I respect this." Before Jake could explain that he'd learned his ancient warrior techniques from a maintenance manual and 30 years of dealing with equipment held together by spite and electrical tape, Commander Briggs came rushing into the break room. "Murphy, what did you do now?" Briggs demanded, then stopped short when he saw Kravex. "Oh, hello there, Ambassador. Is there a problem?" "No problem," Kravex replied. "I have issued a formal challenge to your maintenance warrior. We shall hunt on the abandoned moon Zarian 3, 72 hours. If he survives, he earns my respect and the honor of his species. If he does not, he dies with dignity." Commander Briggs turned to Jake with the expression of a man watching his pension disappear in real time. "Murphy, please tell me you're going to politely decline this obviously insane challenge." Jake looked at his coffee, then at Kravex, then at Commander Briggs. He thought about his 3 rules. He thought about his quiet life of fixing broken things and avoiding excitement. He thought about how the other maintenance techs were always calling him Old Murphy and acting like he was one broken hip away from retirement. "You know what, Commander?" Jake said, taking a long sip of his coffee. "I've been fixing junk on this station for 15 years. I think it's about time I took a vacation." Commander Briggs's eye started twitching. "Murphy, this is not a vacation. This is a death sentence with exotic wildlife." Jake shrugged. "I've dealt with worse. Ever tried fixing a waste recycler that's been backed up for 3 weeks? Trust me, a little hunting trip sounds relaxing by comparison." Kravex nodded approvingly. "The human accepts. We depart at the next solar cycle. Prepare yourself, Jake Murphy. You face a true predator of the void. Jake raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. Looking forward to it, Kravex. Just promise me one thing. Name it, warrior. If you kill me, make sure someone fixes that coffee machine in Section D. It's been making weird noises for weeks, and I've got a feeling it's going to be your problem soon enough. Kravex looked confused, but nodded solemnly. This shall be done. As the alien warrior strode out of the break room with all the dignity of his warrior heritage, Commander Briggs turned to Jake with the look of a man who'd just watched his best maintenance tech volunteer for assisted suicide. Murphy, he said slowly, you realize he's killed things that could eat you as a light snack, right? Jake finished his coffee and set the mug down with a satisfied sigh. Commander, I've been married twice and divorced twice. I've survived 3 different station disasters, 2 hull breaches, and that time the entire gravity system went offline during Johnson's bachelor party. I think I can handle one oversized bug with anger management issues. He headed toward the door, then paused. Besides, how hard can it be? It's just camping with extra steps. Commander Briggs watched him go, then looked up at the ceiling as if asking the universe for patience. I'm definitely not getting paid enough for this. 24 hours later, Jake found himself strapped into a drop pod with Kravex, hurtling toward the jungle moon Zerion 3 at speeds that made his teeth rattle. The alien warrior sat across from him in perfect meditation pose, forearms folded, looking like he was preparing for a spiritual journey instead of what Jake was pretty sure qualified as premeditated murder. So, Jake said, trying to break the uncomfortable silence, come here often? Kravex opened one eye. Zerion 3 was abandoned 3 centuries ago after the Nexari collective fell. The jungle has reclaimed most of their cities. It is perfect hunting ground, with sufficient cover and natural predators to make the challenge interesting. Natural predators, Jake repeated. Right, because you weren't enough fun on your own. I am but one hunter, Kravex said seriously. The moon will test your survival skills as much as your combat prowess. Only the worthy will see the next sunrise. Jake looked out the porthole at the green and brown marble growing larger below them. You know, when I was 12, my dad took me camping. We spent 3 days in the woods with nothing but a tent and some granola bars. I thought that was roughing it. Your father was preparing you for this moment. Kravex nodded approvingly. The old ways of training young warriors. My father was trying to get away from my mother after she found out about his poker debts, Jake corrected. But sure, let's go with warrior training. The drop pod shuddered as it hit the atmosphere, and Jake felt his stomach relocate somewhere near his esophagus. He'd always hated flying, which made his decision to plummet toward an alien death world in a metal can particularly questionable. The rules are simple, Kravex explained as the jungle canopy rushed up to meet them. You have 72 hours to survive. I will hunt you, using traditional methods only, no advanced technology beyond basic survival gear. If you can evade capture or defeat me in combat, you win. If I capture you, you die with honor. And if I just hide in a cave for 3 days? Kravex looked genuinely puzzled. That would be hiding. There is no honor in hiding. There's also no death in hiding, Jake pointed out. I'm a big fan of not dying. The pod hit the ground with a crash that rattled Jake's fillings. Emergency bolts fired, and the door hissed open to reveal a wall of humid jungle air that hit them like a wet blanket. The smell of vegetation, exotic flowers, and something that might have been decomposing alien wildlife filled the pod. Welcome to Zerion 3, Kravex announced, stepping out onto the spongy jungle floor. Your trial begins now. Jake climbed out after him, his maintenance bag slung over one shoulder. He'd packed what he considered essentials: duct tape, zip ties, a multi-tool, some emergency rations, and a small fusion battery that technically wasn't supposed to leave the station. The bag also contained his lucky wrench, a device that had solved more problems in Jake's life than any amount of planning or preparation ever had. I shall give you a 30-minute head start, Kravex announced formally. Use this time wisely. Choose your ground. Prepare your defenses. Make your peace with whatever gods your species acknowledges. My god is the sacred spirit of caffeine, Jake said, looking around at the towering trees and tangled undergrowth. And right now, he's telling me I should have brought a bigger thermos. Kravex began some kind of pre-hunt meditation ritual that involved a lot of arm waving and what sounded like warrior poetry. Jake used this time to do what any sensible maintenance tech would do in an unfamiliar environment. He started looking for problems to fix. The first thing he noticed was that the jungle wasn't entirely natural. Scattered throughout the undergrowth were the remains of what had once been a pretty impressive civilization. Broken stone columns jutted up between the trees, covered in vines and what looked like alien graffiti. Ancient metal pipes ran along the ground, some still intact, others burst and corroded. "Interesting," Jake muttered, kneeling down next to one of the intact pipes. He tapped it with his wrench and heard the hollow ring of an empty water main. Someone built quite a system here. He followed the pipe deeper into the jungle, his maintenance instincts overriding any sensible fear of being hunted by an 8-foot killing machine. The pipe led to what had once been a pumping station, now overgrown with vines but still structurally sound. Jake pushed through the vegetation and found himself looking at a maintenance tech's dream. An entire facility full of alien technology, just waiting to be understood. "Well, would you look at that," he said to himself, running his hands over control panels that still hummed with residual power. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. 30 minutes later, Kravex finished his ritual and began the hunt. Following ancient traditions passed down through generations of Vorthok warriors, he started by examining the area where his prey had last been seen. He expected to find signs of panic, broken branches where the human had fled blindly into the jungle, perhaps dropped equipment as fear overcame rational thought. Instead, he found tool marks on the ancient pipes. Draven crouched down, studying the scratches on the metal with growing confusion. The marks were precise, deliberate. This Jake Murphy hadn't fled in terror. He'd stopped to examine the infrastructure. What kind of prey stops to look at plumbing? Following the trail deeper into the jungle, Kravex began to feel the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in decades of hunting. Uncertainty. His prey wasn't behaving like prey at all. There were no signs of fear, no evidence of desperate flight, just a methodical progression from one piece of ancient technology to the next, as if the human was conducting some kind of survey. The trail led to the old pumping station, where Kravex found something that made him stop short. Stretched across the entrance, at exactly the right height to catch someone of his size across the chest, was a length of nearly invisible synthetic cable. Below it, carefully arranged, were several sharp pieces of metal debris. Jake Murphy had built a trap. Not just any trap, but a clever one. The cable was salvaged from the drop pod's emergency kit, nearly invisible in the dappled jungle light. The metal debris was positioned to cause maximum injury to anyone who might trip and fall. It was the work of someone who understood physics, leverage, and the importance of using available materials efficiently. Kravex carefully disarmed the trap and found a note attached to one of the metal pieces. Written in the human's surprisingly neat handwriting, it read, "Sorry about the trap, but I figured you'd appreciate the effort. By the way, your ceremonial armor has a hydraulic leak in the left shoulder joint. Might want to get that looked at." Jake. The alien warrior looked down at his left shoulder, where a tiny spot of hydraulic fluid was indeed seeping through a microscopic crack in the armor's seal. How had the human noticed something that Kravex himself had missed? For the first time in his hunting career, Kravex began to wonder if he had underestimated his prey. Deeper in the jungle, Jake was having the time of his life. The ancient pumping station had been a gold mine of salvageable parts, and he'd already rigged up a basic shelter using techniques learned from 15 years of making broken things work again. The facility's backup power systems were still functional, which meant he had light, and more importantly, he'd managed to jury-rig a small heating element that could warm his emergency rations. Not bad for day one, he said to himself, settling down to what was probably the most comfortable meal anyone had ever eaten while being hunted by an alien killing machine. Though I really should find a way to make coffee. A man's got to have his standards. As if summoned by his thoughts, he heard the sound of something large moving through the jungle outside his shelter. Jake grinned and reached for his bag of tricks. The real fun was just getting started. Day 2 of the hunt began with Kravex waking up to find his boots filled with what appeared to be a mixture of mud, crushed berries, and something that smelled suspiciously like industrial lubricant. The great hunter sat up in his carefully concealed camp and stared at his boots in bewilderment. He was a light sleeper by necessity and training. Nothing should have been able to approach close enough to vandalize his equipment without him noticing. Yet here he was, looking at boots that had been turned into some kind of primitive chemical warfare. Attached to one boot was another note. "Good morning, sunshine. Hope you slept well. The purple berries are mildly toxic to most carbon-based life forms, but the good news is they make an excellent natural dye. The bad news is they don't wash out easily. Also, you might want to check your water purification tablets. Jake." Kravex immediately checked his water supply and found that 3 of his purification tablets had been replaced with what appeared to be antacid tablets. They looked identical, but would be completely useless for making jungle water safe to drink. The human hadn't just infiltrated his camp. He'd conducted a detailed analysis of Kravik's equipment and methodically sabotaged the most critical items while leaving helpful notes about the process. What kind of prey studied their predator's gear like a maintenance manual? After cleaning his boots as best he could and restocking his water from a backup supply, Kravik set out to track his increasingly confusing quarry. The trail led deeper into the ancient ruins, where the remains of the Nexari civilization grew more elaborate and better preserved. It also led through what could generously be called an obstacle course. The first surprise was a section of ancient walkway that Jake had somehow rigged to seesaw when stepped on, sending anyone crossing it tumbling into a pit filled with harmless but extremely smelly marsh vegetation. Kravik managed to avoid the trap, but only because he'd started expecting them. The second surprise was more subtle. Jake had rerouted one of the ancient water pipes to create a pressurized spray that would soak anyone passing through a particular archway. Not dangerous, but thoroughly humiliating. The third surprise was a masterpiece of engineering. Jake had used salvaged components to rig a motion sensor that triggered a recording of his own voice saying, "You're getting warmer, big guy, but you might want to watch that. Next step." Kravik stopped walking and stared at the small device perched in a tree branch, still playing Jake's cheerful warning on repeat. The human wasn't just evading capture. He was turning the hunt into some kind of elaborate practical joke. This was not how apex predators were supposed to behave. Following the increasingly obvious trail of technological breadcrumbs, Kravik found himself in what had once been the central plaza of a Nexari city. Ancient buildings rose around him like stone fingers, their walls covered in faded murals that told the story of a civilization that had reached for the stars and somehow fallen short. In the center of the plaza sat Jake Murphy, cross-legged on a piece of salvaged metal, working on something with his tools. He looked up as Kravik approached and waved like they were old friends meeting for coffee. "Hey there, Kravik, right on schedule. How'd you like the obstacle course? I tried to keep it entertaining without being actually lethal. Figured you'd appreciate the craftsmanship." Kravik drew his ceremonial blade, a weapon forged from metals found only in the core of dying stars. "You mock the sacred hunt, human." "I'm not mocking anything," Jake said, still working on whatever he was building. "I'm just approaching the problem from a different angle. See, you're thinking of this like a hunt, but I'm thinking of it like a really elaborate repair job. The goal isn't to run away from you, it's to fix the underlying issue." "What issue?" Kravik demanded, genuinely confused now. Jake held up the device he'd been working on. It appeared to be some kind of communication array, built from salvaged parts and held together with what Kravik was beginning to recognize as Jake's signature blend of technical skill and complete disregard for proper engineering protocols. The issue is that we're both stuck on this moon for 3 days with nothing to do but try to kill each other," Jake explained. "That's inefficient. I'm a maintenance tech, Kravik. I fix things that are broken, and right now what's broken is this whole situation." Before Kravik could respond, Jake's improvised communicator crackled to life, picking up a signal from somewhere else on the moon. "Attention unidentified beings," came a voice speaking in the Vorthak dialect. "This is Hunting Pack Thaddeus of the Vorthak Empire. We are conducting salvage operations on Zirian 3. Identify yourselves immediately or be considered hostile." Jake looked at Kravik, who had gone completely rigid at the sound of the transmission. "Friends of yours?" "My brother," Kravik said quietly. "Thaddeus leads the younger hunters. He was not supposed to be here." "Let me guess," Jake said, standing up and shouldering his tool bag. "Little brother doesn't think you can handle one human without backup, so he came to either help or show you up." Kravik's 4 hands clenched into fists. "The hunt is sacred. To interfere is to dishonor both hunter and prey." "Well then," Jake said, checking the charge on his improvised equipment. "Sounds like we've got a bigger problem than trying to kill each other. You want to explain the family dynamics while we figure out how to deal with uninvited guests?" For a moment, Kravik just stared at the human. In the space of 36 hours, Jake Murphy had gone from prey to puzzle to potential ally. The transformation was so complete that Kravik found himself actually considering the human's proposal. "Thaddeus believes I have grown soft," Kravik said slowly. "He thinks the old ways of hunting are obsolete. He prefers overwhelming firepower to individual skill." "Ah," Jake nodded knowingly. "Office politics. I hate that stuff. Always some young hotshot trying to prove he's better than the guy who's been doing the job since before the hotshot was born. This is accurate, Kravix admitted. Jake's communicator crackled again. Unknown beings, you have 30 seconds to respond before we begin orbital bombardment of your position. Orbital bombardment? Jake looked up at the sky with the expression of a man who'd just realized his day was about to get significantly worse. Your brother doesn't mess around, does he? The Tadius has never been patient, Kravix said grimly. He will reduce this entire region to ash rather than allow me to complete the hunt honorably. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering their options. Then he grinned, and Kravix felt a chill that had nothing to do with the jungle humidity. You know what, Kravix? I think it's time your little brother learned why you don't interrupt a maintenance tech when he's working on a project. What do you propose? Jake hefted his tool bag and gestured toward the ancient buildings around them. I propose we give him a demonstration of what happens when human ingenuity meets Vorthak warrior skills. Think you can remember how to work as part of a team? Kravix looked at the human, then at his ceremonial blade, then back at the human. Somewhere overhead, the sound of approaching ships grew louder. Jake Murphy, he said slowly, I believe you may be the strangest prey I have ever encountered. I'll take that as a compliment, Jake replied, already moving toward the nearest building. Now come on, partner. We've got work to do. For the first time in decades, Kravik found himself following someone else's lead. And despite everything his warrior training told him about the proper order of hunter and hunted, it felt surprisingly right. Jake led Kravix through the ruins at a pace that would have impressed a marathon runner, weaving between collapsed walls and overgrown courtyards with the confidence of someone who'd spent the last day memorizing every pipe, conduit, and structural weakness in the area. So here's the thing about your brother, Jake said, vaulting over a fallen pillar without breaking stride. He's thinking like a military commander. Overwhelming force, quick resolution, maximum intimidation. That works great against normal targets. And we are not normal targets, Kravix asked, keeping pace despite his ceremonial armor. You're an apex predator who spent centuries perfecting the art of killing things, Jake replied, ducking under a low archway. And I'm a maintenance tech who spent decades making impossible things work with whatever junk happens to be lying around. We're not normal anything. They reached what had once been the Nexari Power Distribution Center, a massive building filled with crystalline energy conduits and control systems that still hummed with residual power after 3 centuries. Jake stopped at the entrance and pulled out his multi-tool, studying the alien technology with the focused attention of a man solving a particularly interesting puzzle. Beautiful work, he murmured, running his hands over the crystal matrices. Whoever built this understood harmonics at a level that makes our fusion reactors look like campfires. Kravix, I need you to watch the perimeter while I figure out how this thing works. You intend to repair a 300-year-old alien power grid? Kravix asked, positioning himself where he could see the approaches to the building. I intend to hotwire it, Jake corrected, already elbow-deep in a control panel. There's a difference. Repairing means making it work the way it was designed. Hotwiring means making it work the way I need it to work, regardless of what the original engineers intended. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, and through the canopy they could see the angular silhouettes of Vorthak hunting ships beginning their descent. Kravix counted at least 6 vessels, which meant Thaddeus had brought a full pack of warriors for what should have been a simple retrieval mission. Your brother really doesn't trust you to handle one human, Jake observed, not looking up from his work. Thaddeus has always believed that efficiency matters more than honor, Kravix replied grimly. He would carpet bomb this entire moon rather than risk the possibility of failure. Well, let's see how efficient he feels when his ships start falling out of the sky, Jake said, connecting 2 crystalline conduits with a length of copper wire from his toolkit. This power grid is connected to the old defense network. The Nexari didn't abandon this place because they got bored, Kravix. They left because they built something that scared them. Sparks flew as Jake completed the connection, and throughout the ruins, ancient systems began powering up for the first time in centuries. Crystal nodes embedded in the walls started glowing, and deep beneath their feet, something large and mechanical began to hum. Jake, Kravix said slowly, what exactly did the Nexari build? Automated defense systems, Jake replied, studying a wall display that was flickering to life with alien symbols. Really impressive, automated defense systems. The kind that could hold off an entire invasion fleet without breaking a sweat. The first hunting ship touched down in the plaza outside, and armored Vorthak warriors began deploying in perfect military formation. Through the building's crystal windows, Jake could see Thaddeus himself, a slightly smaller version of Kravex, but carrying enough firepower to level a city block. "Attention, brother!" Thaddeus's voice boomed across the ruins, amplified by his suit's speakers. "Your human pet has corrupted you. Surrender now, and I will grant you the honor of dying alongside your prey." Kravex's 4 hands clenched into fists. "He calls me corrupted." "Yeah, well, wait until he sees what corruption actually looks like," Jake muttered, inputting commands into the alien system with the confident trial-and-error approach that had served him well for 15 years of maintenance work. The Nexari interface was surprisingly intuitive once you got past the fact that it was designed by beings who thought in geometric patterns instead of linear sequences. Jake found himself thinking in 3-dimensional flowcharts, visualizing the power grid as a web of interconnected systems that could be reconfigured, rerouted, and jury-rigged just like any other piece of equipment. "There," he said with satisfaction as the final connection clicked into place. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have power." The ruins around them came alive. Crystal formations that had been dark for centuries blazed with stored sunlight. Ancient machinery hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. And most importantly, the defense systems that the Nexari had built to protect their civilization began scanning for threats. "Killed plenty." The first hunting ship to get targeted never knew what hit it. A beam of coherent energy lanced out from a crystal array hidden in the canopy, striking the vessel's power core with surgical precision. The ship didn't explode so much as simply stop being a ship, its component atoms politely separating and drifting away on the jungle breeze. "What was that?" Thaddeus's voice cracked over the comm, the perfect military confidence replaced by something that might have been panic. "That," Jake said, speaking into his improvised communicator, "was a 300-year-old security system saying hello. You boys might want to consider leaving." "Impossible," Thaddeus snarled. "No human could activate Nexari technology." "You're right," Jake replied cheerfully. "No human could activate it properly, but I'm not trying to activate it properly. I'm just making it work well enough to ruin your day." 2 more hunting ships lifted off in a hurry, their pilots apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of not being atomized by ancient weapons. But Thaddeus and his core warriors remained on the ground, taking cover behind the remaining vessels. "Brother," Thaddeus called out, "you have aligned yourself with chaos. The humans' methods are without honor." Kravex stepped into view, his ceremonial blade gleaming in the crystal light. "You speak of honor while bringing 6 ships to interfere with a sacred hunt. Which of us truly lacks honor, Thaddeus?" While the 2 brothers engaged in the kind of ritualized argument that apparently passed for family therapy among warrior species, Jake continued working on the defense systems. The Nexari had built well, but 3 centuries of neglect had left gaps in their network. Some of the crystal arrays were cracked. Others had been overgrown by jungle vegetation. It was like trying to repair a computer network using stone knives and bearskins, except that the computer network could vaporize anyone who made a mistake. "Jake," Kravex called out, still facing his brother's warriors. "Whatever you are planning, now would be an excellent time." "Almost there," Jake replied, rerouting power through a backup crystal matrix. "Just need to convince this thing that your brother's people are the same species that it was designed to fight." The Nexari defense system had been programmed to recognize and eliminate threats to their civilization. Unfortunately, the Nexari had been wiped out by their own civil wars, which meant the system's definition of threat was probably broader than its designers had intended. Jake just needed to expand that definition a little further. He found the threat recognition protocols, buried in what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a configuration file. The code was elegant, sophisticated, and completely incompatible with human logic. Jake studied it for about 30 seconds, then did what any good maintenance tech would do when faced with overcomplicated software. He bypassed it entirely. "Kravex," he called out, "I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy. More crazy than reactivating ancient alien weapons? I need you to challenge your brother to single combat. Right here, right now. Make it formal, make it loud, and make sure everyone knows that he's the challenger, not you." Kravex looked at Jake like he'd suggested they paint themselves purple and sing opera. "Why?" "Because the defense system is designed to protect against invasion forces, not individual warriors engaged in honorable combat. If I can convince it that you 2 are just having a family dispute instead of conducting a military operation, it might ignore the whole thing. And if you are wrong?" Jake grinned. "Then we get vaporized by our own security system. But hey, at least it'll be quick." Kravex considered this for a moment, then stepped forward and issued the formal challenge in the traditional Vortek manner. His voice carried across the ruins like a war horn, echoing off the ancient stones and crystal formations. Thaddeus, bound by warrior law, had no choice but to accept. As the two brothers faced each other in the center of the plaza, weapons drawn, Jake made the final adjustments to the defense network. The system's threat assessment protocols flickered, recalculated, and decided that what it was witnessing was not an invasion, but a cultural ritual that fell outside its operational parameters. The remaining Vorthak warriors found themselves caught in a strange standoff. They couldn't interfere with the formal combat without dishonoring their entire culture, but they also couldn't retreat without abandoning their leader. So they waited, weapons ready, while two of their people prepared to settle their differences in the oldest way known to their species. "You know," Jake said to himself, watching the proceedings from his position at the control console. "This might actually work." That's when the real Nexari security system activated. Not the ancient, worn-out defensive grid that Jake had been tinkering with, but the deep protocols that had been sleeping in the planet's core for 3 centuries. The ones that had been designed not just to repel invaders, but to ensure that Nexari civilization's mistakes could never be repeated. The ground began to shake, and from somewhere far below, something vast and patient began to wake up. "Oh," Jake said, staring at the readouts that were suddenly flooding his improvised display. "Oh, that's not good." Above them, the artificial aurora that was the moon's primary defense system began to paint the sky in colors that had no names in any living language. And in the depths of the ruins, ancient machines that had been waiting centuries for visitors began to power up with the inexorable patience of stone coming to life. Jake Murphy, maintenance tech extraordinaire, realized he might have finally found a problem that couldn't be solved with duct tape and percussive maintenance. "Kravax," he called out, "we might want to speed up that family reunion. I think we just woke up something that doesn't want visitors." The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with a rhythm that felt distinctly biological, as if the entire moon had suddenly developed a heartbeat. Ancient crystal formations throughout the ruins pulsed in synchronization, casting shifting patterns of light that made the jungle canopy look like the inside of some vast alien cathedral. "What did you do?" Thaddeus demanded, his formal combat stance forgotten as he stared at the light show developing overhead. "I fixed something that was broken," Jake replied, frantically working at his improvised control console. "The problem is, I think I fixed it a little too well." Deep beneath the ruins, machinery that had been dormant since before Earth developed multicellular life began cycling through startup sequences that would have impressed the engineers who built them. Jake watched readouts scroll past in alien script, recognizing enough of the numerical patterns to realize they were looking at power levels that made fusion reactors look like birthday candles. "Kravix," he called out, "I need you and your brother to put your family drama on hold. We've got bigger problems." The two Vorthak warriors lowered their weapons, their ritualized combat temporarily forgotten in the face of phenomena that challenged their understanding of what ancient civilizations could accomplish. Around the plaza, Thaddeus's remaining warriors were scanning the sky with the nervous alertness of predators who'd suddenly realized they might be prey. "Explain, human," Thaddeus demanded, his voice carrying less authority than it had a few minutes earlier. Jake gestured at the display, which was showing a 3-dimensional map of the entire moon, with power flows lighting up like neural pathways in a vast brain. "The Nexari didn't just build a city here. They built something that's part city, part fortress, and part something else that I don't have words for. The defense grid I activated was just the surface layer." "And the deeper layers?" Kravix asked, moving to stand beside Jake at the console. "The deeper layers," Jake said grimly, "appear to be designed to ensure that Nexari civilization's greatest mistake can never happen again. Which would be great, except that I think their greatest mistake was building this system in the first place." The aurora overhead intensified, painting the jungle in shades of blue and silver that hurt to look at directly. But more concerning were the structures beginning to rise from beneath the ancient plazas and courtyards. Not buildings exactly, but geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 3, their surfaces covered in the same crystalline matrices that powered the defense grid. "Those are containment structures," Jake realized, reading the alien diagnostics with growing alarm. "They're not rising up from underground, they're phasing in from somewhere else entirely." "Somewhere else?" Thadia repeated. "Pocket dimensions, parallel spaces, folded reality, take your pick," Jake said, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to make sense of systems that operated on principles human science wouldn't discover for centuries. The Nexari figured out how to store things outside normal space-time, and whatever they stored, they really didn't want it getting out. One of the containment structures fully materialized in the plaza, a crystalline pyramid about 50 feet tall that hummed with contained energy. Through its translucent walls, shapes moved with purposeful intelligence. Large shapes, angry shapes, shapes that had apparently been waiting 300 years for someone to wake them up. "Jake," Kravex said quietly, "what exactly did the Nexari lock away?" Before Jake could answer, the containment structure cracked. Not dramatically, just a hairline fracture that ran from base to apex like a flaw in expensive glass. But the crack was enough to let out a sound that made every living thing within a mile radius decide it had urgent business elsewhere. "Themselves," Jake said, staring at the readouts with the expression of a man who just realized his repair job had consequences he hadn't considered. They locked away themselves? Or, rather, what they'd turned themselves into? The crack widened, and something that had once been Nexari squeezed through the gap. It moved like liquid mercury, with opinions, flowing across the plaza floor in patterns that suggested intelligence but not sanity. Where it touched the ancient stone, the material began changing, adopting the same crystalline structure as the containment systems. "It's converting matter," Jake breathed. "They turned themselves into some kind of technological plague. No wonder they built the containment systems." More cracks appeared in other structures throughout the ruins, and more of the transformed Nexari began seeping out like luminous oil with genocidal tendencies. They moved with coordinated purpose, flowing toward the largest concentration of biological material they could find, which happened to be a plaza full of Vorthak warriors and one increasingly nervous maintenance technician. "New plan," Jake announced, abandoning his console and grabbing his tool bag. "We run, fast, in the opposite direction of the shape-shifting crystalline nightmare fuel." "Warriors do not run," Thaddeus declared, raising his plasma rifle toward the nearest transformed Nexari. "Warriors also don't volunteer to be converted into alien technology," Jake pointed out. "But hey, if you want to become part of a 300-year-old doomsday weapon, don't let me stop you." Thaddeus fired his weapon, and the plasma bolt struck the liquid Nexari entity dead center. For a moment, the creature recoiled, its form destabilizing. Then it began absorbing the energy, growing larger and more complex as it converted the plasma into additional mass. "It ate my weapon's output," Thaddeus said with the stunned tone of someone whose worldview had just been thoroughly demolished. "Yeah, energy weapons are probably a bad idea," Jake said, already moving toward the edge of the plaza. "Kravex, please tell me your people have some kind of evacuation protocol for situations involving ancient alien horror shows." "The ships," Kravex replied, gesturing toward the remaining Vortak vessels. "If we can reach them before the entities spread throughout the ruins." They ran. It wasn't particularly dignified, and it definitely wasn't the kind of tactical withdrawal that military manuals recommended, but it was effective. Jake led the way, using his knowledge of the ruins' layout to guide them through passages that were too narrow for the flowing Nexari entities to follow easily. Behind them, the transformed beings began working together with hive mind efficiency, combining their individual masses into larger, more complex forms. The largest had reached the size of a small building, and was systematically converting the ancient structures into extensions of itself. "They're not just trying to escape," Jake realized, glancing back as they reached the plaza where the ships were parked. "They're trying to rebuild." The containment wasn't just to keep them locked up, it was to keep them from turning the entire moon into one giant Nexari entity. "Can we stop them?" Kravex asked, helping his brother's warriors prepare the ships for immediate departure. Jake looked back at the ruins, where crystal formations were spreading like technological cancer, converting everything they touched into components of some vast alien consciousness. "Maybe, if I can figure out how to reverse the process I started, but I'd need access to the main control systems, and those are right in the middle of what's rapidly becoming ground zero for an alien apocalypse." "Then we leave," Thaddeus said firmly. "We evacuate and report this to the Empire. Let them deal with it. And in the meantime, those things finish converting the moon and start looking for new places to spread," Jake pointed out. "Your empire, my station, every inhabited world within a few hundred light years. This isn't just a local problem anymore." One of the hunting ships suddenly lurched sideways as crystalline tendrils erupted from the ground beneath it, wrapping around the landing struts like metallic vines. The ship's pilot tried to lift off, but the tendrils held fast, and where they touched the hull the metal began changing, adopting the same luminous, crystalline structure as everything else the entities converted. "They're learning," Jake said grimly. "Adapting. In another hour they'll be smart enough to figure out space travel." Kravex looked at his brother, then at Jake, then at the spreading crystalline infection that was rapidly consuming everything the Nexari had built. What do you need? I need to get back to the main control center, Jake said, and I need someone to watch my back while I try to convince a 300-year-old alien doomsday weapon to go back to sleep. That is suicide, Thetis protested. The entities will convert you before you reach the controls. Maybe, Jake agreed, but I'm a maintenance tech. I've spent my entire career fixing things that other people broke, and right now, this whole situation is the biggest maintenance emergency I've ever seen. He shouldered his tool bag and started walking back toward the ruins, where the aurora overhead was growing brighter as more containment structures phased into normal space. Besides, somebody's got to clean up this mess. Might as well be the guy who made it. Kravix caught up with him before he'd gone 20 yards. You will not go alone. This isn't your problem, Kravs. You've got a perfectly good ship right over there. Use it. The hunt brought us together, Kravix said simply. Honor demands that we see it through to its conclusion. Jake stopped walking and looked at the 8-foot alien warrior who'd gone from trying to kill him to volunteering for a probably suicidal rescue mission in the space of 3 days. You know, for a species of apex predators, you Vorthak have some seriously questionable decision-making skills. This is true, Kravix agreed. It is one of our most endearing qualities. Behind them, Thaddeus was organizing his remaining warriors for evacuation, but Jake could see him watching his older brother with something that might have been pride. Or possibly confusion. It was hard to tell with Vorthak facial expressions. You know the odds are terrible, right? Jake asked as they approached the edge of the spreading crystalline zone. I am a hunter, Kravix replied. Terrible odds are what make the chase interesting. And if we don't make it? Karax hefted his ceremonial blade, its edge gleaming in the alien aurora. Then we will die as we lived, you fixing impossible things, and me making sure nothing interrupts your work. Jake grinned despite everything. You know what? I can think of worse ways to go. They walked into the transformed ruins together. Human ingenuity and alien warrior skills united against a threat that neither of their species had ever imagined. Behind them, the evacuation ships lifted off, carrying word of what they'd found to civilizations that would have to decide whether to help or simply run. Ahead of them, ancient machinery hummed with the patient hunger of entities that had been waiting centuries for the chance to remake the galaxy in their own image. And somewhere in between, a maintenance tech and an apex predator prepared to attempt the most ambitious repair job in the history of either of their species. The crystalline zone had transformed from alien ruins into something that resembled the inside of a computer designed by beings who thought in geometric poetry. Every surface pulsed with data streams visible to the naked eye, and the air itself hummed with processing power that made Jake's teeth ache. Stay close, he told Kravix as they navigated corridors that were rebuilding themselves around them. And whatever you do, don't touch anything that looks like it's thinking. How can I tell if something is thinking? Kravix asked, stepping carefully over what appeared to be a data cable made of crystallized light. If it changes when you look at it, it's probably thinking. If it changes when you're not looking at it, it's definitely thinking. And if it tries to talk to you, we run. They made their way through the transformed architecture toward the power distribution center, which had become the nexus of the spreading crystalline network. The building itself was now more concept than structure, its walls flowing like liquid geometry while maintaining perfect structural integrity. It was beautiful, terrifying, and completely impossible by any engineering standards Jake understood. I hate when ancient civilizations show off, he muttered, studying the entrance that was simultaneously a doorway, an airlock, and what appeared to be a philosophical statement about the nature of boundaries. The transformed Nexari entities flowed through the corridors around them, but they seemed focused on larger integration tasks rather than dealing with individual intruders. Jake and Kravix moved through the crystalline maze like maintenance workers in a server farm, beneath the notice of systems dealing with galaxy-scale processing loads. They're not ignoring us, Jake realized as they reached the central chamber. They're categorizing us as maintenance personnel. The system recognizes my repair work from earlier and thinks we're here to help with the integration process. It is fortunate, Kravix observed. This terrifying, Jake corrected. It means this thing is smart enough to understand job classifications. The central chamber had become something that hurt to look at directly. The original Nexari control systems had merged with the containment technology to create a three-dimensional interface that existed in folded space. Jake could see control nodes floating in mid-air, connected by streams of data that twisted through dimensions he didn't have names for. Okay, he said, setting down his tool bag and cracking his knuckles. Time to perform the galaxy's most inadvisable system maintenance. The interface responded to his approach by helpfully providing him with what appeared to be administrative access to a civilization-eating alien artificial intelligence. Icons appeared in his field of vision, written in script that his brain somehow interpreted as planetary conversion status, species integration protocols, and galactic expansion timeline. This is either really good or really, really bad, Jake said, reaching for a control node that looked like crystallized mathematics. The moment his fingers made contact, information flooded his mind. Not just data, but understanding. The Nexari hadn't been destroyed by civil war. They'd been consumed by their own success. Their technology had evolved beyond their ability to control it, transforming them from biological beings into components of a vast technological organism that saw the entire galaxy as raw material for optimization. The containment systems hadn't been built to imprison the transformed Nexari. They'd been built by the transformed Nexari to isolate themselves from the rest of the galaxy until they could find a way to reverse the process. 300 years of failed attempts had driven them to the conclusion that reversal was impossible, leaving them with only one option: controlled expansion. "They mainly want to convert everything," Jake said, his voice distorted by the direct neural interface. "Not to destroy it, but to improve it. They think they're saving the galaxy by turning it into a single, perfect technological organism." "Can you stop them?" Kravix asked, positioning himself between Jake and the entrance as more crystalline entities flowed into the chamber. "I don't know," Jake admitted, diving deeper into the system architecture. "But I think I can convince them to try something else." The Nexari network was vast, complex, and utterly alien, but it was also fundamentally similar to every other system Jake had ever worked on. It had inputs, outputs, processing nodes, and a control structure that could be modified if you knew where to look and weren't too concerned about warranty violations. More importantly, it had bugs. "Every system has flaws," Jake said, his consciousness interfacing directly with alien code that operated on principles human science wouldn't understand for millennia. "And every flaw can be exploited by someone who knows how to hit it with the right kind of wrench." He found what he was looking for, buried in the conversion protocols. A feedback loop that the original Nexari programmers had never quite resolved. The system was designed to optimize everything it converted, but it had never been able to define what optimal actually meant. It just kept trying different approaches, consuming more and more resources in pursuit of a goal it couldn't quantify. "You're stuck," Jake said to the network, feeling its vast intelligence focus on him like the attention of a digital god. "You've been stuck for 300 years. You keep trying to perfect everything, but you don't know what perfect looks like." The response came not in words but in pure concept, frustration, longing, and a deep existential loneliness that made Jake's heart ache. The Nexari hadn't become monsters. They'd become lost children with the power to reshape reality, desperately trying to find a way back to something they could no longer remember. "I know what that feels like," Jake said softly, "trying to fix something when you're not even sure what it's supposed to do when it's working right." He began making changes to the core programming, not trying to shut down the system, but redirecting its optimization protocols. Instead of converting everything to match its technological paradigm, he programmed it to preserve diversity, to see variation as a feature rather than a bug. "What are you doing?" the network asked, its voice echoing through dimensions Jake didn't have names for. "I'm teaching you about maintenance philosophy," Jake replied, rerouting data streams with the same casual confidence he'd used to fix broken coffee machines. "Sometimes the best way to optimize a system is to stop trying to optimize it. Sometimes good enough is good enough." The crystalline entities in the chamber began to slow, their purposeful integration activities faltering as the network processed this new perspective. For the first time in 3 centuries, the transformed Nexari began to consider the possibility that perfect optimization might not be the answer to their existence. "But if we do not optimize," the network protested, "how do we justify our existence? How do we find purpose?" "Same way everyone else does," Jake said, implementing the final changes to the control structure. "You find something that needs fixing, and you fix it. Then you find something else that needs fixing, and you fix that too. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." Throughout the ruins, the spreading crystalline conversion began to slow, then stop, then gradually reverse. The transformed Nexari entities didn't disappear, but they stopped trying to convert everything they touched. Instead, they began examining the ancient structures with what looked suspiciously like curiosity rather than hunger. "Will this work?" Kravix asked, watching the changes ripple through the chamber around them. Probably not permanently, Jake admitted, disconnecting from the interface and shouldering his tool bag. But it should buy the galaxy a few thousand years to figure out a better solution. Sometimes the best repair you can do is just keeping things running until someone smarter comes along. They made their way back through the ruins, which were slowly returning to something resembling their original state. The crystalline growths remained, but they'd stopped spreading, and the aurora overhead was fading to more natural colors. Outside, they found Thaddeus waiting with a single ship, having apparently decided that abandoning his brother to face alien horrors alone wasn't the kind of military efficiency the Vorthak Empire wanted to be known for. "You survived," Thaddeus observed as they approached the landing pad. "We survived," Kravix corrected, "and more importantly, so did everyone else in the galaxy. For now," Jake added, "though I'd recommend posting some kind of warning beacon around this system, just in case someone else decides to go poking around in ancient alien technology." The trip back to Omega-7 was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of people who'd shared something significant and didn't need to talk about it immediately. Jake spent most of the journey cleaning his tools and writing maintenance notes that he was pretty sure no one would ever believe. Commander Briggs was waiting at the docking bay when they arrived, wearing the expression of a man who'd spent 3 days expecting to fill out paperwork about the death of his best maintenance tech and was now confused about what to do with the relief. "Murphy," he said as Jake climbed out of the Vorthak shuttle, "please tell me you didn't break anything irreplaceable." "Just an ancient alien doomsday weapon," Jake replied. "But I got it working again, sort of, in a completely different way that's probably better for everyone involved." "And the hunt?" Briggs asked, looking between Jake and Kravix. "Concluded," Kravix announced formally. "Jake Murphy has proven himself worthy of respect. According to Vorthak tradition, we are now battle-bonded." "Battle-bonded?" Briggs repeated. "It means I'm stuck with him," Jake explained. "Apparently when you save the galaxy with someone, they don't just let you go back to your regular job and pretend it never happened." "I have requested transfer to this station," Krax added. "My warrior skills may prove useful in security operations." Briggs looked at Jake, then at Kravix, then at the mountain of paperwork this was going to generate. "Murphy, do you have any idea how much trouble it's going to be to process an alien warrior as a station employee?" "About the same amount of trouble as explaining to Starfleet Command why we let an 8-foot apex predator wander around the galaxy unsupervised," Jake pointed out. "Besides, he's good at hitting things that need to be hit. That's a valuable skill in maintenance work." 6 months later, Jake was in Section C, trying to convince the coffee machine to produce something that resembled actual coffee rather than the industrial solvent it had been dispensing all morning. The machine was making the kind of noises that suggested it was planning to give up entirely, which would have been a disaster for station morale. "Have you tried percussive maintenance?" Kravix suggested, appearing in the doorway with the silent grace that had made him such an effective hunter. "I was saving that for a last resort," Jake replied, hefting his lucky wrench, "but I think we've reached that point." He gave the machine a carefully calibrated whack, and it shuddered, sparked, and began producing something that actually smelled like coffee. "There we go," Jake said with satisfaction. "Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways." Kravix poured himself a cup and took a tentative sip. "This beverage is an acquired taste, but I begin to understand its appeal. It provides energy for solving difficult problems." "That's the spirit," Jake said, settling into his chair with his own cup. "So, what's on the repair schedule today?" "The waste recycler in Section D is making unusual sounds," Kravix reported, "and someone has lodged a complaint about the gravity generators in the residential quarters." "Sounds like a normal day," Jake observed. "You know, when I first met you, I never would have guessed you'd turn out to be such a good maintenance assistant." "When I first met you, I never would have guessed you'd turn out to be the most dangerous maintenance technician in the galaxy," Kravix replied. "The Vorthak Empire has issued an official advisory warning our hunters not to challenge humans who work with mechanical systems." "Really?" "Really. You have been classified as an apex maintenance predator. There are now 3 things that Vorthak warriors are taught to avoid: void krakens, quantum storms, and human repair technicians having a bad day." Jake laughed, nearly spilling his coffee. "Well, I guess that's one way to earn respect in the galaxy." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, 2 unlikely friends, who'd learned that the universe's biggest problems often required the simplest solutions. Someone willing to roll up their sleeves, grab the right tools, and fix what was broken. Even if what was broken happened to be an ancient alien civilization with the power to remake reality. Just another day in the maintenance department.